Hi everyone. So I know I said I would make this video for 2,000 subscribers, but the numbers kind of went up a little quickly, and so now right now it's at 10,000, so I'm just going to make this video for 10,000. And this video basically is me talking about my whole process, because there's a lot of new people who probably don't know what's going on, who I am, and what I'm doing here. My name is Siamon, and I've been trying to make Egyptian music for almost a year now. Or maybe it has been a year, I'm not sure. But anyway, when I first started, I was living in Egypt at the time, and I was writing my own English lyrics about these hymns to the gods, and then I would have them sent to my friend Ali, who would translate them into Middle Egyptian for me to then reconstruct from the transliteration. And that's obviously a very different process than what I'm doing now with the Lyre, so I felt like I needed to kind of discuss what happened and everything like that, and how my process has changed. But before we do that, I noticed that a lot of people have a lot of questions, and so I wanted to go over some of the basics of what the Egyptian language is and why we need to reconstruct it and how that works. So the ancient Egyptian language was a language that spanned from at least 3100 BC, which was the unification of Egypt, up until around 300 AD, which is when the last temples shut down and the last hieroglyphs were produced. The last living stage of the Egyptian language is technically still alive as a liturgical language, and that would be the Coptic language of the Coptic Church. And so because Coptic is basically the last stage of ancient Egyptian, it gives us a really good hint as to how Egyptian might have sounded. And the reason we need a hint to how Egyptian might have sounded is because Egyptian was a language that did not preserve any of the vowels in the writing system. This is called an abjad writing system, which basically, as I said, means that you preserve the consonants, but very few to no vowels are found in the written language. Because of this, knowing the exact pronunciations of a lot of ancient Egyptian words is very, very difficult. You'll come across sentences like this, and it's very hard to know what that means, obviously, and how it would have sounded, because it sounds like complete gibberish. However, there are ways that scholars have found to reconstruct the ancient Egyptian language. There's a few ways of doing it. I mainly go by the Coptic working back route, especially with the Lyre songs, because the songs that I'm reconstructing, the poems, are from the New Kingdom and the late period, which would have been a stage of the language much closer to Coptic. Another way that you can reconstruct the ancient Egyptian language is by looking at the Afro-Asiatic or Proto-Afro-Asiatic language, which is the language that many languages stemmed from. Afro-Asiatic was spoken before 10,000 BC, basically, and is the predecessor to many languages across Africa as well as the Middle East. Some examples of Afro-Semitic languages would be Arabic, Hausa, Omadic. I think Iraku is also an Afro-Asiatic language. Hebrew is an Afro-Asiatic language. Tamashek is an Afro-Asiatic language. And of course, as I said, Egyptian is an Afro-Asiatic language. And so by looking at the similarities in all of these languages, we can look at how these words might have sounded, the root words, basically, how they would have been in Proto-Afro-Asiatic. Not every Afro-Asiatic language has a writing system that doesn't preserve the vowels. Some of them do have the vowels, and so that helps us see what the vowels would have been back when it was Proto-Afro-Asiatic. And of course, when it comes to languages like Arabic, that's a modern language. It's still descended from Afro-Asiatic, and although Arabic doesn't write down all of its vowels, and neither does Hebrew, it's a living language, so we know what the vowels are. The methods of reconstructing are discussed pretty well in Lopriano's book, as well as in Carsten Peust's book, and I will link both of those in the description if you would like a more detailed example of how this reconstruction process works. So that explains the language part. Reconstructing the language is pretty difficult. For my process specifically, I see the transliteration of the word, I know the definition of the word, I try and see if there is a matching word in Coptic, and that gives me a hint as to some of the vowels. There were certain processes that happened that you can kind of track throughout the whole language. And so, for example, there could be a palatization of a certain set of phonemes or something like that. Another source that I also use that is mentioned in Lopriano's book is Akkadian sources, especially the Amarna letters, because it was written in Akkadian or Akkadian, which is an ancient language of Mesopotamia that had its vowels in the writing system. And so when you were writing in Akkadian and you were trying to write down an ancient Egyptian toponym, name, or something like that, then you would write it with all the vowels. And so by looking at that, we can actually see how certain things were pronounced. One of the most, I think, common ones that we find is the name Amun, and that's why we know that it was pronounced like that. Not only because it's preserved in Coptic as Amun, but because in Akkadian it is pronounced Yamanu. There are a couple variations on this, but it's generally Yamanu. Whereas the transliteration just by itself, the hieroglyphs are J, M, and then N, which doesn't tell us a whole lot. Reconstructing ancient Egyptian is a almost purely hypothetical process. So when I reconstruct ancient Egyptian, I really do try the best I can to get an accurate thing, but it's not going to be 100% accurate. No reconstruction is going to be. For me, this is just a passion project that I really, really love to do. And so I saw a lot of comments saying that, like, oh, I didn't know the ancient Egyptian language, like, lived on this longer. Like, how do you know it? And things like that. I don't know it. I'm reconstructing it according to what I've read, and that's it. And no, it's not technically still a living language. Although Coptic is spoken as a liturgical language, we wouldn't call Latin a living language either, just because it's used by the church. When it comes to the music portion of things, I also got a lot of questions asking where was this music written down and things like that. And I answered this a few times, but I also want to answer it here just so that, the record is straight. Ancient Egyptians did not have musical notations, and that means that we don't have any preserved musical melodies or anything like that from ancient Egypt. We do have things like that from other cultures, mostly in Mesopotamia, as well as in Greece, of course, but that's after a lot of the history of Egypt. And so, for example, things like the Hurrian hymn have been really popular lately because it's a melody that was written down to a Hurrian goddess. And then also you have things like the SEIKILO's epitaph, which is also a written down melody from Greece. But Egypt did not have musical notation, unfortunately. There is some evidence that they used a system of chironomy, which is basically using hand signals to represent certain musical notes or changes in the music. This is a very interesting field of study, but it hasn't been delved into too much, and there's no metaphorical Rosetta Stone to let us know what hand signals would mean what note, what tune, what change, and things like that. So when you hear the melodies I play on the Laden lyre and in my older hymns that I wrote with Ollie, they're not ancient Egyptian melodies, they're my melodies, and I create them from my heart and from my imagination and from my studies as well, listening to music from, of course, ancient times. For example, the Hurrian hymn. I listen to a lot of Peter Pringle's stuff and Michael Levy's stuff. They make great music relating to the ancient world. I listen to Greek music, and I listen to, as well, modern African and Mesopotamian music. I know I said modern Mesopotamia. It's not really called that. It's usually called the Middle East, but I kind of prefer to use modern Mesopotamia. There are also Coptic songs that have been preserved that I have listened to, but most of them are, again, liturgical, meaning that they're purely for the church. Coptic folk songs are much harder to track down. I think I found a couple examples, and they're very interesting, and so I kind of implemented that style as well into my music. But overall, I just want to stress, none of the stuff that I play has been written down unless I specifically tell you it has been written down. The thing about my process with reconstructing the phonetics of ancient Egyptian is that it is evolving. I know I made a video a while back talking about how to pronounce the kind of faux IPA that I'm using, and I say faux because I'm not using the full IPA, I'm just substituting in some IPA symbols for phonemes that don't exist in the English language. But the thing is that this is my passion project, and so I do research, but it takes me time to research, obviously, and I just had a feeling that if I waited for my study to be perfect, or as perfect as it could be, I would never start making hymns in the first place. And so I just started making them, and I continue to learn as I go along, and things are always changing in the way that I reconstruct. And so the guide to singing our hymns is probably accurate for singing our hymns back then, but I have learned a couple things since then, and things will probably change, and so your best bet is probably to just consult the IPA chart on Wikipedia. So just to clarify, the work that I was doing before was written by me, translated by my friend Ollie, and then reconstructed from there and put with music that I composed. And that's a totally different thing. I was reconstructing more for an Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian kind of sound, and I didn't get it quite right, obviously. These days, what I'm doing with the Leiden lyre made by the Luthieros is I am reconstructing already existing ancient Egyptian texts and putting them with music I composed. And so that's a pretty big difference. As well, obviously, the content of the songs is different because now I'm reconstructing poems and laments and things like that, although there is, I think, one hymn right now. But because these texts were written in the New Kingdom and late period, although some might have been written in the Middle Kingdom. Oh yeah, the dispute between a man and his ba, that was written in the Middle Kingdom. What am I talking about? But because it's a later version of Egyptian, the reconstruction is going to look different. So I don't know if anybody noticed that, but the reconstruction for the older hymns that I made with Ollie is quite different from the reconstruction I'm making now because I'm reconstructing for a later version of the language. Again, the language evolved throughout the freaking 4,000 years of its use. So this whole project, and kind of this whole channel, but especially this project with the Egyptian music, is just kind of a passion project of mine. It's definitely not a scientific project, it's more of an academic thought experiment almost. But I really love doing it, and I don't plan to stop anytime soon because it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's one of the things that I feel the most accomplished about, so to speak. Like, it fulfills me the most, more than anything else that I do. And I do a lot of creative work. I draw, I write stories, I write poems, and I do illustrations, I do painting, I do just regular music as well, which I also post on YouTube. I also do embroidery, for example. I mean, I do a lot of things, but this is what really fulfills me the most. And so, I hope I can keep doing it for a long time. I also, in this video, did want to give an example of the difference between a modern guitar and the Leiden lyre, because I did have some questions when I was first getting the Leiden lyre from my family, mostly like, why do you need this? You know, it's a string instrument, it basically sounds the same. But it doesn't really, and so I wanted to give an example of playing the same melody on guitar and then playing it on lyre and showing you how different it can sound and how different of a vibe it gives. So let's do that. Here is my guitar. I don't know if I've ever shown it on my channel before. I probably have. Oh, sorry, right. The microphone is not next to my face, so I have to talk louder. Okay. This is my guitar, and I'm going to play part of the hymn to Ptah from one of our older videos. So that's the sound of the guitar playing the hymn to Ptah, and so let's check out the Leiden lyre. Look at this beauty. Alright, here we go. I'm gonna get a little closer just so the microphone can kind of pick it up, because it's a little bit quieter. So that's how it sounds on the Leiden lyre, which is a much softer and, I feel, kind of older sound, which is very interesting. As a fun little bonus, I wanted to show you a couple fun things that you can do with a lyre, including the Leiden lyre. So one interesting thing that I found is the way that you hold the Leiden lyre specifically seems to be against your body like this. So in the depictions of the Leiden lyre well, not the Leiden lyre, but the depictions of the Egyptian box lyre in tombs shows this little divot here, and the hand coming directly out of it. And I'm not sure that there was any evidence of this tying string. However, I've found, even without it, if you press your hand into here, you can still play it. I can stand up even. and still hold it against my body by keeping the hand right there, which is very interesting. But I do prefer to play it with this, even if I'm holding it into my body like this, because it's just an extra safety net. So one fun thing is this little trick here, which is to distort the sound just so slightly by pressing on the string below here. You can see I actually kind of press in a decent amount. And that changes the tone of the string just slightly. It's kind of a microtonal type thing. Another fun thing is harmonics, of course, which is when you are able to go an octave up by placing, this is very fun and difficult, by placing your finger somewhere on the string, a specific place on the string, and plucking it right below. It creates a harmonic resonance. I originally started learning this technique by using my left hand to place my finger on the places that need to be pressed in order to create the harmonic, but by looking at a couple of videos of people playing lyre and using this technique, I was able to figure out that you use your pointer finger and place it on the place that needs to be placed for harmonic resonance, and you pluck with your thumb. It's a very interesting technique, and I've tried to implement it in a song. It's a very different feeling song. It's quite difficult, of course, to try and play the regular octave with my left hand and then play the octave up on the harmonics with my right hand. It's very interesting. So those are some fun little tips and tricks about the Laden lyre, about Egyptian box lyres in general, and kind of how they compare to a modern instrument, which I thought was fun. If you have more questions, you can leave a comment down below. Obviously, as I said, I'll put some sources in the description so you can read about music in ancient Egypt, about reconstructing the Egyptian language phonetically, and also I guess I'll put links to my Patreon and Ko-fi if you feel like supporting me. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for 10K subscribers. That's kind of crazy, and I didn't think that would happen at all. And I also just want to say I'm really grateful about so many kind comments that I got on this video. It seems like you guys really liked this melody. I don't know what happened. It just kind of blew up, and I really wasn't expecting that because that video, I feel like I didn't edit it very well. But either way, you guys were so nice, and you left so many sweet comments about how this song inspired you and how deeply the passion that people put into their projects can touch your heart, which is really just wonderful. And I loved reading all your comments, and I'm sorry if I didn't respond to some of them or didn't react to some of them or didn't answer your question. I did get a lot of comments and it was very difficult to keep up with them, but I tried my best. Again, if you have a question and if you asked it earlier and I didn't respond to you, just ask it again. You can comment your question down below. You can also join a chat on Patreon. If you subscribe to just the lowest tier, you can join a chat where you can ask me questions and just talk with me, and I'll be there for a while, you know. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining me on this fun, artistic, and academic journey. And in general, just thank you so much for listening to my music, and I hope to keep making it for a long, long time. Oh, also, if you have any recommendations for Egyptian texts that you want me to reconstruct and maybe put music to, I would be happy to look at some of your recommendations because I think it's very interesting, and it's also very difficult to find certain texts. So if you have the transliteration for it, even better. But if you just have a recommendation for a text, that would also be wonderful. So again, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for subscribing. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.